Hi. So, my name is Caleb. Check. Hi. So I do this just in Raleigh, and one of the things that we did this past month was we had sort of introspection September. I like to try to do themes with people. So we're doing like spooky stuff in October. We're talking about this week. We have otherworldly encounters, angels, demons, and other weird things. We were also doing a thing on the afterlife in November. We're doing dysfunctional faith, talking about cults, conspiracy theories, and how to avoid them. But then this last month, we spent some time doing a lot of introspective stuff. And one of the things that I thought was really good, really practical, was we did a little workshop on making decisions. Anybody here ever had to make a decision before? Yes? All right, very good. Who here likes making decisions and has a really easy time with it? Sometimes, yeah. Some people are just like, we're done. Who here like struggles with it sometimes? Yeah, okay, very good. That's not a new thing. I don't know if that's reassuring or if you're just like, wow, people really are dysfunctional. But one of the things that's important to think about is that making decisions can also be an important part of our spiritual lives and how we sort of think about ourselves and how we position ourselves in the world. And so one of the things I wanted to look at, and one of the things I did, was I made this little guide that's inspired by something that St. Ignatius of Loyola did, which is basically like how you go through making an important decision. So has anybody here ever heard of Ignatius of Loyola? Yeah? What do we know about him? The Jesuits, yeah, he helped found that. Yeah. Anything else? Okay, cool. I mean, that's pretty good. So one of the things that he did was, so he had this military career. He always wanted to be like a knight and stuff, and then he got wounded in battle, and he had a spiritual experience, and he was like, actually, I think I'm gonna have like a career in the spiritual life instead. And so he went through and he did all this stuff, and he compiled all of his works and his reflections and stuff into this thing called the Spiritual Exercises. And one of the things that he had in there is a whole subsection on making decisions. So, you know, there are times in life when you're not really going to have a chance to be super contemplative about your decisions. You're just going to have to make a split-second decision. And it's like, well, it's either going to work out or it's not, right? We've all been there. But then there are other times in life where you are going to have a minute to sort of sit down and think about things and go through them. And oftentimes we can kind of approach this from a couple of different perspectives. One is some people have a bias for action. Anybody want to like take a stab at what like a bias for action is, or maybe you already know? Yeah.
Like you generally tend toward like doing.
Yeah, you're just going to go ahead and do it, right? You know, you have a big thing that's coming up. You're just like, well, I got to make a decision, and I'm just going to do it. Maybe you didn't spend a lot of time thinking about it. And then there's like kind of the opposite of that, which is where you just kind of go around and around and around, and around and around. And then just in case you missed something, you go around again. And that kind of person has a bias. I'll say a bias for contemplation. And so the thing about the bias for action, what can we think of as some possible downsides to the bias for action? Might be dangerous, yeah.
You might regret it.
You might regret it, yeah.
The consequences you didn't foresee.
Yeah, consequences you didn't foresee, right? You're going to make a decision, and your bias is towards just like, no, I just need to go ahead and do it, and that's it. You didn't necessarily like spend some time with it, right? So maybe there's something that you could have just avoided, and it was like right there in front of you the whole time, right? I was like, well, if I just thought about that for a minute, maybe that didn't have to happen. Anybody ever had that experience in life? Yeah, I've seen some aggressive nodding so far, so that's good. Okay, so we get the bias for action. What might be some downsides to the bias for contemplation?
Missed opportunities.
Missed opportunities, yeah.
you suffer with anxiety
You
because you
suffer
just
with
spend a
anxiety.
lot more time trying.
Yeah. Yes.
Like at a certain point, additional contemplation adds nothing. Like you've already
Yeah.
contemplated, and now it's just like delaying.
Yeah. Maybe you're just confusing yourself and tricking yourself into thinking you're contemplating, and really you're just avoiding whatever it is. Yeah.
Not making a decision is still a decision.
Exactly. Not making a decision is still a decision, but you get to tell yourself at the end of the day, I didn't make that decision. You kind of did. There's one other thing. You may also just add unnecessary complications to it if you don't have some kind of structured contemplation in what you're doing. You ever unnecessarily complicate something in life? Yeah. All right. So, so the thing about this is, theoretically, this is supposed to help us not do that, right? So,
Anybody wants a clipboard? They are there. I can pass this. Okay, you're right there. If you want one.
so we have here, it's 6 steps and then just kind of a taking stock of yourself before you begin. So if we'll open this up, we'll look here at background considerations. Before we engage in the 6 proper steps, it's good to just kind of locate yourself and ask some preliminary questions. The first and most important of these is this decision actually necessary? I feel like that's a self-explanatory, right? You ever complicate your life with unnecessary decisions, unnecessary things that you have to do, right? So you just ask yourself, like, genuinely, is this something I really have to be involved in? Is this something I have to do? The answer is no. Go watch TV or something. Is the thing that you're considering really something that's your responsibility to handle, or is it someone else's? Do you ever find yourself in a circumstance, or have you been in a circumstance where someone is taking responsibility for something that's not really theirs? We call that, what are some words for that? Over-functioning? Being nosy? Right? Micromanaging? Being intrusive, not minding your own business. These are all ways in which you're just like getting involved in things that don't actually involve you. So yes, proceed. No, don't proceed. Or there's a third option here. This decision is best made as a group. You also wouldn't proceed with this because making group decisions looks different than making a personal discernment, right? And then we want to think about how you feel about a matter going into it. So there is one perspective where you can come from where you're actually pretty certain about what needs to be done. You're certain about what the issue is, and you just have to do it, right? But then there's like a couple of ways that you can feel about that. One is you're fine with it. That's usually the easiest place to begin. The second one is, you know exactly what needs to be done, and you're like, eh. Then you're going to want to kind of explore for a little bit, why might I be avoiding this issue? You still might want to go through something like this, because even if you're confident about what the situation is and what you need to do, there might be something that you're missing, right? Does that make sense? The next one is emotional and unclear about what needs to be done. So you're going to want to make yourself aware of your feelings, even if they are contradictory. Do you ever have a moment in life where you have like a big decision thing coming up and you have not just a lot of feelings, but feelings that don't go together and maybe mutually contradict one another about it, right? So you just want to be aware of that. You probably can't even resolve that before you even start the decision-making process, but you can be aware of it, because if you just constantly wait for yourself to be in a state of emotional agreement before you make an important decision, you may never actually start making a decision. The next one is you're unclear about the matter, but you're not really emotional or worried about it. So the point here is that you would just proceed and actually start to get some clarity to go along with that. All this making sense so far? Wonderful. Exciting. So we go into the proper steps. Step 1 is clearly articulate the issue, and you have to do it in like it's about a concrete thing, and you have to state it in a way that best makes sense of it, right? So there are some ways in which an issue might be clearly articulated, where it has kind of, it's better stated as two positive actions, right? So the example I have here is, I will either stay in my present apartment with a roommate I really like, or I'll accept my friend's invitation to live with them, right? So that's two things that you really need to seriously contemplate, but really what you're trying to figure out is, do I stay or do I go? The next thing here is it's better phrased as just a single statement with the alternative being the negation of it. And that is, I will budget 5% of my income to charity. Whether you will or you won't, but it's better just phrased that way. So the first thing you want to do here is state the issue and state it clearly. So I'd like for everybody to just take a moment, and if there's a decision that you have kind of brewing that you want to work on, go ahead and think about how you might clearly state that. And if you're comfortable doing that, just go ahead and write it down. Writing more or less got something? Okay, cool. So we have our issue clearly stated. How many people found that their issue was best phrased in the choice between positive actions? Right? And then how many found that it was best phrased as just kind of a singular one? Okay, cool. So step 2 is you're going to want to examine your preferences and your aversions. St. Ignatius liked to think of this as having an open mind, preferring neither to have a yes or no to his question, right? So he wants to come to it with as open a mind as possible. And we will have positive associations and preferences with stuff and negative associations or aversions. And these things can sometimes cloud our thinking. They can include emotional hangups, past negative or positive experiences that might lead to projection, a lack of information, or personal or political bias. So I'm going to give you an example of a way that maybe like a positive association with something might cloud your judgment on it, right? So say you want to apply to a graduate school program and you get into one that is in California, right? And they're giving you absolutely no financial aid. It is not well ranked in your field. It's going to be really expensive for you to move there. You have no idea how you're going to live there. Once you get there, you don't know anyone. You have no support whatsoever. You've also gotten into other schools that are giving you a lot more money and they're better ranked. For whatever reason, this one's just not doing very much for you. But you're really feeling some kind of draw to this school for some reason. Like there's just something about it. And you realize you've always wanted to live in California, particularly this part of California, right? Your personal bias for wanting to live in California is clouding the question of whether or not you should go to this school. Does that make sense? Yeah. And you can kind of conflate these two things together and start overemphasizing how great the school is or how great of an opportunity this particular thing is, when really what your actual priority is in this circumstance is wanting to live in California. So now, do you need to go through and say, do I need to be prioritizing grad school or whatever right now and just think about moving to Southern California and figuring out life from there? Maybe. Or do I need to put the Southern California thing aside and really realize the next couple of years need to be dedicated to grad school and I can just find a job there? Right? So doing this kind of thing can really, so the negative associations clouding your judgment are usually pretty easy to find, right? Because that's kind of the thing that stands out the most. But sometimes the positive ones can trick you a little bit more. So for what you just wrote down, I'd like for everybody to go through and write down one positive and one negative. And then once you start going through these positive and negative things, one of the things that hopefully starts coming to light are uncertainties that you may have, lingering questions, and this may start to expose some things that you just haven't thought about at all. Things you're not paying attention to, more information that you might need to figure out, and things that you might be ignoring, maybe need a little bit more attention. Haven't asked everyone to thoroughly go through all of the positive and negative stuff here, but on your particular issue, if there's something that you know you already have a question about that needs to be answered, you can go ahead and write that in now too. So step 3, after step 2, is something I'm calling informed contemplation, which is where you it's kind of a mix of information gathering, more detailed information gathering after you've figured out your location of positive and negative biases and then some questions that you really need to go after. So what you'll want to do is gather some information, and then you'll want to find kind of a more structured way to put some contemplation on it. And some things that are really helpful here are finding a trusted conversation partner. The more likely this person is to not just tell you what you want to hear, the better. And if it's a person that you know that makes good decisions, I would also like put that person towards the top of your priority list as well. Or you could go through and use a journal, or you can do them both, whichever one seems most helpful for you. Some things that will help you get started in this are going through and looking at the opinions that you have, the positive, the negative ones, and start saying, is this opinion well-founded and why? Just because it's an immediate opinion you have, it doesn't mean it doesn't require some examination. What are some good resources to counterbalance any biases that you may have, or perspectives that you haven't considered? Who might be affected by this particular thing? Should I talk to them? And are some of these people more affected than others? So, for instance, say you are doing something where, say you're married, and you're looking at taking a job in Maine. You're probably going to want to talk to the person that you're married to, and then also maybe talk to like your third cousin that you meet once a month for coffee. But the person who's going to be moving with you might need a higher priority on their opinion on this than your third cousin that you meet once a month, right? That's the kind of thing I'm talking about. And this last one here is really important. Do you need to consult some kind of expert or professional? If so, which kind? This is especially important in medical, financial, and legal decisions, and WebMD does not count as an expert, right? So this step really requires that we have a longer list of positive and negative biases, but if you all want to just take a minute and look at these and write down any just sort of immediate impressions that you have about answers to these questions, go ahead and do that now. So yes, St. Ignatius did say that you should make a pros and cons list, but he didn't say it quite like that. He said to consider reckoning up how many advantages and utilities follow me from holding the proposed office or benefice for only the praise of God our Lord and the salvation of my soul, and to consider likewise, on the contrary, the disadvantages and dangers which are there in having it. I felt like pros and cons was a more succinct way of saying that. If you prefer the original text and piety of a 16th century Spanish mystic, it's public domain. You can find it online. So, our pros and cons list. This is important that you follow these steps like in this way, because it's going to keep you from putting the cart before the horse. A lot of times when we go through and make important decisions, before we can kind of clarify stuff, we confuse maybe the ends and the means together. So we get kind of lost in some of the details, and we get lost in our feelings about something versus the actual thing itself, right? So what is important here is to just go through and, like you're making a grocery list, you make some items in a pro and con column. And then when you're done with that, you go through and you rank them. And then after that, you go through and you start analyzing it. So right now, what I'd like for everybody to do is, with your issue at hand here, just go through the pros and the cons section, and however many come up to you, just go ahead and start writing them. And then we'll go through next and rank them. If everybody's okay with this, let's go around the room. What do you immediately notice about your pro and con list? Yeah, we'll start with you. It's fine.
It's very focused on how things will affect my mental health. So that's something I'm very worried about.
Okay. And what do you notice about the distribution of priorities on pros and cons?
This is perhaps my mistake. I tried to make them about the same in terms of ranking, but to like balance it out. But maybe that's like me trying to make the decision harder for myself.
Yeah. So that's actually really helpful. So the distribution of pros and cons, why might it be helpful for us to rank our pros and cons? It's not just to give you one more thing to do in your life.
Where your priorities lie.
To see where your priorities lie. Because you could look at this and see that you have the exact same number of pros and cons. But then if you go back and look at it again, after you've ranked them, you might see that like you're actually prioritizing a lot more of the pros than the cons, right? Or vice versa. So they don't have to match and they don't have to be balanced and they don't have to be imbalanced. This is really just kind of diagnostic to figure out where you are at this point. Because at this, well, once you get here, it actually helps you to figure out like, oh, okay, so maybe I have, you know, only 3 things in the pros and 5 in the cons, but maybe the ranking just says that that appearance might be a little bit deceiving, right? Does that make sense? Very good. Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
That I have more pros.
Okay.
I guess it's just more positive.
Mm-hmm. And then what did the distribution of priorities tell you about it? So there's more pros and they're all more important. Okay, cool.
My cons are more obvious than my pros. My pros carry more, especially emotional weight, than my cons do.
Interesting. Oh, that's cool. Okay.
It's all kind of vague. Future is necessarily uncertain, but
Yeah.
the pros seem to get more attention.
Okay. And is that they get more attention and more weight? So that's the priorities go that way too? Okay.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. That's all right.
I think what I noticed is, well, one, I started off with way too broad of an issue.
Okay.
It's more of a thing that you figure out over a lifetime. But I think that my pros are a lot more, I forget the difference between objective and subjective. But one is more opinion based and the cons are more factual.
So subjective would be more about your opinions.
Yeah, so my pros are more subjective. They tend to do that. My pros are like, oh, I'd be happy there. Cons would be like, oh yeah, it's $70,000. Like that.
Okay.
And
Okay.
I'm not sure what that means if
Mhm.
I value how I think of things versus how I'm doing the things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's really good. Yeah. Okay. That's good. I love this. I love how this is going because we like our next thing is another like structured like kind of like contemplation thing, and this is like so good. Like this is all it's all happening. Everybody. Okay. Yes.
I think my pros are focused more on like my wants,
Uh-huh.
but my cons are more like emotion.
Oh, okay. All right. And then did you notice any difference in how they're ranked?
I think my pros definitely hold more weight.
Okay. And what about you? Did you notice a difference in ranking?
They're great.
Okay. Not there yet. That's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
I noticed that all of my cons are like one thing under like an umbrella, but but it's all like
Yeah.
So when I realized that, I ranked them also wrong. I ranked them in 1 through 5. 1 through
Okay.
7.
Well, just make a note to yourself that you
That
did
I
it that way, and you
can't
don't have to change
repeat.
anything. Yeah. Yeah. You're good.
Okay. See?
I got more cons than pros.
More cons and pros. Okay.
I feel like more of a weight from cons.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, I had more pros than cons. I feel like my pros were definitely more emotion based, like
Mhm.
to be fun or kind of intangibles.
Mhm.
Cons were a little more tangible. And then with ranking, I don't know if I did it right. I ranked the pros among themselves. In fact, it's hard to. I realized I did it.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like that too.
Okay.
Okay.
How'd you want it?
Okay. Yeah, but
Okay. So, I mean, you can do it, I guess, however you want. I gave a suggested thing. What I was thinking was, on a scale of 1 to 5, how important is this? Like when you go to the doctor and they're like on a scale of 1 to 10, like if I touch your knee, are you going to scream, or is it like nothing happened, right? So yeah, no, that's okay. That's fine. That's good. That's actually helpful feedback for me. I should clarify that.
So it's kind of like rating it instead of ranking.
Yeah, yeah, rating. Wow. See, look at that. We're all making progress today. Okay.
I hope probably the same number of pros and cons, but I think that I noticed my pros are kind of more definite. My cons are like this might happen.
Okay.
I have the same amount of pros and cons, and I found that like my cons were more emotion based and my pros were more factual, so that was really interesting. I feel it's different than how everyone else.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's yeah, wow. So many immediate questions come to mind. Yeah, wow, that's really cool. Okay. And then so how many people rank theirs like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? Oh, fun. Okay. Good.
Really smart.
I know, but you know what? We're gonna thank you so much. We're gonna rate like at the doctor. Okay. Well, you know what? It's for your further contemplation, go back and think about that again. And another thing to think about is any issue that you have in any particular column. Is this something that's related to the specific issue at hand, or is it kind of symptomatic of a broader problem that's going to exist regardless of whether or not you make this decision, right? So, for instance, when I did this with someone in Raleigh, she was trying to figure out, she's a vegan, and she's trying to figure out whether or not she wanted to try to incorporate like animal products back into her diet, right? And one of her cons was she didn't want to have to go back and tell her family because they had already made all these accommodations and given her a really hard time about it. And she was just like, I don't really like my family, and we fight all the time anyway. And I was like, okay, so that definitely goes on the cons list, but that's not like as directly related to this issue as like, people that you are friends with on the internet and vegan circles being like, what is wrong with you, right? Because that's directly related to this. Does that make sense? Yeah. So you just want to think about that too. Good. Step 5, holistic contemplation. So after we sort of spend some time on that, it's good. This is really designed to have like more of a this is like kind of soaking time with the issues. So it can be kind of short, especially if the pros and cons start sometimes when you start doing the pros and cons and the rating them, things start really making themselves apparent, and you're like, okay, well, I'll think about this some more, but I think I can really see where things are going. Other times you're just kind of like, maybe I need to sit with stuff. But this is really where we start to foster senses of self-awareness and the kinds of questions that pros and cons bring up. So does one option over another one bring feelings of joy or distress? Are the feelings of joy, are they hollow and fleeting, or are they deeper, right? So is it something that's just going to be like a good thing for a minute, or is it like something that reaches you on a deeper level? And is the distress a warning sign or a necessary growing pain? So those are two like kind of important distinctions to make when it comes to positive and negative experiences. What are the values involved in each option? And how are they affected? Are they challenged? Are they strengthened? Are they compromised in some way? What feelings, preferences, and avoidances keep wanting to involve themselves in this decision? So back when we located ourselves at the beginning, we were like, these are all my biases. Which ones keep coming up, right? Like, which ones are like, oh yeah, that really keeps happening a lot, even though you're like trying to make yourself aware of it. And then St. Ignatius actually put this as an alternative means of making a decision, but like, all due respect, I feel like this is also helpful to think about here as a means of this, is if someone was in a similar circumstance to you and they asked you for advice, what would you tell them? What would your advice be to them? So I would just want to go ahead and take a moment and look at some of these questions here, and if there are any that stand out to you that are answerable at the moment, go ahead. So in this stage of contemplation, especially if it's a big issue that doesn't have to be decided immediately, it can take a while. And if it's an issue that has a lot of emotional impact, you might want to be pay attention to how this thing affects your sense of character and how you are in the world. So Ignatius says, and I would agree, positive signs of God's guidance are thoughts and feelings that inspire courage, love, confidence, hope, faith, patience, tolerance, kindness, justice, fairness, and generosity. St. Paul would also call those the fruits of the Spirit. Signs that something are amiss, or when you have a lot of feelings around the issue that are rooted in egoism, careless passion, anger, jealousy, revenge, greed, violence, related feelings such as that. So we don't have to answer this final question now because we haven't spent enough time with it, but that's always something to keep in mind. Step 6 is Judgment Day. You make your decision, and you actually state the decision, the actionable thing. You do it, and here's the thing that you do, though. You do it with confidence, but not necessarily with certainty, because nothing is ever really certain. But you can do it with confidence, because the thing is, you can sit down at the end of the day and say, I've literally done everything I possibly can to make this decision responsibly. And I think sometimes we think we can only be confident about something and only be confident about ourselves if we're certain of the outcome. But if you start thinking about making decisions as an exercise, not just in the outcome itself and your power to predict it, but as an exercise in maintaining like a good sense of character and like exercising your rationality and balancing out your feelings with, because if you've noticed, we've taken stock of our feelings, we've done research, we've talked to people, we've written stuff down. Balancing this out, taking a more holistic approach, you can do it with much more confidence than if you're just like, I don't know, and you throw it and see where it lands, right? And then state a plan of action. How are you going to do the thing that you need to do? And then once you've done it, Ignatius would say that you should confirm it, which is after the thing is done and you've lived with it for a while, how do you feel? What's that rooted in? After all of this stuff that you've done through this decision-making process, can you see where these feelings might be coming from? Can you figure out why that might be the case? Is this just some of like your old garbage coming back up? Or is this really like something that is really amiss here? And then after it's done, is there something that needs to be changed, and how can you change it? And I expect anybody to have made a complete decision for the thing that we stated here at the beginning. But yeah, that's the 6 simple steps in making a decision. Was this helpful? Yes? Okay, that's good. Yeah, don't just be nice. So did this process bring any clarity to anybody on anything? Just like raise your hand, nod excitedly. Yeah. Okay, very good. So let me see show of hands again. Who had the decision as 2 positive statements? Okay, well, one of you feel comfortable sharing what your issue was?
Okay. I'm trying to figure out where I'm moving next year and like the positives and negatives of living on or off campus.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. Oh, that's great, because that's really the examples I get. That's fantastic. Yeah. Okay, good. So was this helpful? And obviously you don't have to make a decision right now, but like
No, it's for like listing out everything.
Yeah.
What really makes sense regardless of how I feel about wanting to live on or off campus.
Yeah.
And what's action or responsible decision.
yeah. Okay, good. Yeah. Very good. And then who had the as a single statement? Yeah. Anybody feel comfortable sharing that? If not, that's fine too. Okay. Wonderful. So thank you all so much for having me, and I'm glad this was helpful. Yeah.